Good morning, everyone. I think we are live right now. So thanks all for attending. This is the first of the two panels that we have organized at the University of Manchester. And more specifically, it is the Center for Digital Trust and Society that's organizing this. And before we get started, I wanted to say thank you very much to the organizers for giving us a space to share some of our research. It's the second year that we are doing this, so we are glad to be here one more time. So thank you, Michael and Melissa, for putting this together once again. This year, we have decided to organize two different panels. One on crime and security in the metaverse, that's been mainly organized by Professor Emma Barrett, that's here with us today. And the second one is going to be a showcase of different papers we have done in our center during the last few months. And so now for this first hour, we have three speakers that will be giving three different presentations, three very interesting presentations about crime and security in the metaverse. And they will be addressing this problem from different perspectives and different approaches, and also from the lenses of different disciplinary backgrounds. So this is, in essence, a multidisciplinary panel, bringing in people from across different faculties and different schools in different universities, and to talk about how virtual reality and extended reality can have implications for trust and security in digital environments. So we have, as I was saying, three different speakers. And the first one is Professor Emma Barrett. She's a professor in psychology, security, and trust at the University of Manchester. And her talk is going to be around child safety in extended reality. Emma not only is professor at the university, but she's also the principal investigator of Sprite Plus and the Sprite Plus network that many of you will know, that brings together researchers and practitioners and policymakers from across the whole of the UK and beyond to share good practices and research in this domain and to organize activities. So if you don't know Sprite Plus, you are all welcome to Google it. She has done extensive research around harmful use of new and emerging technologies, and now she's involved in a set of projects relating to online child sexual abuse. She will be sharing some of her research later today. The second speaker is Lynsay Shepherd. She's a lecturer in cybersecurity and HCI at the School of Design and Informatics of Abertay University. And she will be presenting a paper called From Virtual Bliss to Virtual Betrayal, the Growing Threat of Romance Fraud in Virtual Reality Spaces. I've been checking some of her research, and I was, I had read some of your papers, Lynsay, but I never connected the dots. And so she has done research on romance fraud. The last paper, I was reading it a couple of days ago, this systematic review one, very interesting. She has also done research on online misinformation, phishing, and impact of cybercrime, and impact of COVID-19 on cybercrime trends, among other areas. And our third speaker today is Melvin from the School of Computing Science at the University of Glasgow. And he will be presenting a paper called Implications of Extended Reality on Privacy, Security, and Behavior, Insights from Experts. Melvin is doing his PhD, but he has already published journal articles, and the title of his PhD is Human-Centered Methods to Communicate Security and Privacy, Critical Information in Virtual Reality. And if I'm not mistaken, the paper that he will be sharing today has already been published, so if someone was interested, you can always go online and read more about it. So without further ado, I will just let Emma get started with the first presentation, and we will have a chance for Q&A at the end after the three talks.
Is that sharing okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, David, and thank you very much to the organisers of SECRO for this opportunity to talk about a really interesting and important topic. So I'm going to be talking about extended realities technologies and child safety issues, and particularly talking about online child sexual abuse and exploitation. This is drawing on some work that I've been doing for a few years with colleagues in computer science and in psychology, so it's very much an interdisciplinary project. It was initiated with some funding from GCHQ, which is one of the UK government's intelligence agencies that has a remit to counter child online abuse. And it's now being funded by the University of Manchester. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about online child sexual abuse activities, and then a little bit about extended reality technologies for those of you who aren't familiar with them, just give you a sense of what they are, and then talk about the potential risks this might raise for children and what might be done to mitigate some of those risks. And I should say also up front that both myself and my colleagues, we're very positive about extended reality technologies. We like them a lot. We think they've got huge potential. We think they're going to be part of life in the future. But as with many areas of tech developments, the development of the technology has kind of rushed ahead of thinking through some of the risks and ethical issues involved in their deployment. So that's one of the issues that we wanted to address in our project. In terms of online child sexual exploitation and abuse offending behaviours, this covers a number of different activities related to producing child sexual abuse material, procuring it and sharing it. So this includes what you might think of as the kind of commonly thought of as grooming, manipulating and coercing children into producing indecent images or sharing indecent images. It can also include stealing intimate images, so typically by maybe hacking into a child's account and stealing images. These activities also include facilitating the abuse of children in real time through live streaming sites. So it's possible to log on to internet sites where you can view live child abuse, and again, both viewing and engaging in it is an offence. It also includes creating synthetic child abuse imagery, so cartoons or photorealistic images of children, which is an offence in this jurisdiction and some other jurisdictions as well. And of course, sharing abuse imagery, which might happen in the clear net, so on kind of websites that can be accessed through the ordinary internet, but also through kind of hidden websites and darknet sites as well. It happens over social media, it happens through peer-to-peer messaging and so on. So all of these are the kind of range of behaviours that are included when we talk about online child sexual exploitation and abuse. So unsurprisingly, governments across the world are trying to pass legislation that aims to keep children safer in online environments. And what's going through in the UK at the moment is the Online Safety Bill. It's in its final stages, will be enacted probably later on this year or early next year. It's a very complex bill, but the bit that's important for this presentation is that it'll place a legal duty on providers of online services to carry out risk assessments of how their service, their platform or their technology may raise risks to children and vulnerable users. And it also places a legal duty to mitigate those risks, so typically by removing content, filtering content, or preventing children from accessing it. It also places a legal duty on the providers of online pornography to prevent children from accessing it, which kind of raises a lot of implications in terms of age verification tools and techniques, which are controversial and complex and beyond the scope of this presentation. The Online Safety Bill is designed to be tech agnostic. In other words, it should apply regardless of what sort of technology it is, as long as it's a technology that allows some kind of user-generated content and user interaction. And so the government says that this means that extended reality technologies are in scope of the Online Safety Bill. But this does raise some challenges. For new technologies, how do you carry out a robust and a comprehensive risk assessment for a technology that isn't yet widely used, and we don't yet know quite how malicious users might use it? And how do you find ways of keeping children safe from a technology where the harms haven't yet been fully demonstrated? So these are the kind of challenges that we were trying to address in our project. So for people who aren't familiar with extended reality technologies, there are basically three types on a spectrum, if you like. So at the top there, virtual reality technologies allow users to, via a headset, to be fully immersed in a 3D digitally created environment. So it's primarily a visual immersion, but there's also oral, so that you can hear things whilst you're in there as kind of immersive sound. And increasingly, there are manufacturers who are selling haptic devices, so you could wear a glove or a vest, which will provide you with sensory feedback that is synchronized with what you're seeing on the virtual reality screen. So you could have a hug, for example, in virtual reality. Augmented reality technologies, I think probably most of us have got these on our smartphones somewhere. The middle picture there is from mine. So this is a mapping app where you can view the physical world, and then the augmented reality will overlay, superimpose digital images on that physical world. So here you can look at where you are in the countryside, and the program will overlay the landmarks that you can see. Mixed reality is kind of, as it suggests, somewhere in the middle. So it's the same as augmented reality in that you are seeing a virtual environment superimposed on your physical environment, but it's designed in such a way that it appears to be part of that physical environment. So as you move around that environment, you can move around the object. There are a wide number of applications of virtual reality and augmented reality technologies. So you can go to meetings and presentations in the metaverse. Maybe one day SecRev will be in the metaverse. You can train. You can. There are fitness applications. You can go to a virtual concert. And there are also a number of social VR spaces that you can go to. So your avatar can meet with your friends or with strangers' avatars around a campfire, or in a park, or at a comedy club, or in what looks a bit like an airport hangar down there. So there are spaces where people can interact in real time and socialize. As with any technology, the adult industry has been an early adopter and an enthusiastic adopter of extended reality, and there are a lot of adult extended reality applications out there. So within this sector, you can engage with real people or animated characters, or real people as avatars within kind of adult settings. There's immersive video, so you can be feel that you're inside a porn video as a kind of actor within that. There are various adult games out there. There are social rooms for kind of chat. There are private strip clubs, and that kind of middle picture there is from the entrance to a strip club in virtual reality. And as with live streaming in kind of traditional 2D interactions, you can have live streaming in virtual reality as well. So there are sex workers who will interact with users within a live stream situation where the user could then feel that they were in the room with that sex worker. And an emerging area of adoption is something called teledildonics, which is kind of what it suggests. So these are masturbatory devices that can be connected and synced with a virtual reality presentation. So when we're thinking about how some of these technologies might be used and adopted by offenders for child sexual abuse and exploitation, one of the ways that we can think about this is from an affordance perspective. So affordance is very common in criminology to think about affordances in terms of criminal action. So we might think of technologies of having affordances that create opportunities for offenders to act, but also that might constrain offender behaviour or indeed victim behaviour. They're not quite the same as features, but features give rise to affordances. So the affordances are the properties that arise from the relationship between the technology and the user. And so what we're thinking here is, well, we've got these technologies with these features, and how might a criminally motivated user exploit those features or perceive those features to offer them opportunities to do things or not do things in virtual reality. So we've identified a number of risks for children through here. The one that's probably had most publicity is the possibility of using social VR for grooming. So anyone who's been in a social space in virtual reality will probably have heard of children in there. You might have witnessed or heard interactions between children and adults in these spaces that might concern you. In theory, children are not supposed to be using children under the age of 13 are not supposed to be using virtual reality. So most platforms will have as part of their terms and contents that under 13s can't use it. In practice, a lot of children are using virtual reality and are entering these spaces. And because there's no age verification or age assurance measures in place or identity verification measures in place, this means that the spaces that are accessible to any user are also accessible, obviously, to children. So that space down there in the bottom picture, the Chicago penthouse, this is a private space that someone has created within a virtual reality social space. It says they're 18 plus, so it's indicating that there may be age inappropriate content in there, but there's nothing to stop a child in that social VR space then entering the Chicago penthouse space. So there's nothing to stop them there. Which raises risks that children will be exposed to graphic content, again, age inappropriate content of various sorts, including sexual content or sexualized content. There are also some risks to children from harassment and bullying and threatening behaviour within those social spaces. And again, this is quite common, and there's quite a lot of anecdotal examples of children being bullied within these spaces and attempts at groping and other harassment. Another thing that we kind of thought through is whether the virtual reality technologies can create new methods that offenders might exploit for abusing children. So we talked earlier about this idea of live VR webcam sites, so VR camming, and the potential that this raises for live streaming abuse of children in an immersive setting. So rather than just an offender viewing the abuse of children through a monitor, they could actually be present or feel present in that room where the abuse is taking place in a virtual reality setting. And we also considered how haptic technologies and in particular teledildonics might offer new options for offenders to abuse children physically, and new options for the offender to have a more rewarding experience. So these are concerns. Anecdotally, we've heard that there is some evidence that this is happening. It's kind of a difficult thing to research, but the anecdote suggests this may be occurring. I also mentioned earlier that one of the areas of offending in online child sexual exploitation is the creation of synthetic images of children, and this is becoming increasingly easier through new AI technologies. So it's possible to create, as one of those top pictures suggests, you can take your own photograph or a photograph of someone else and create an avatar that looks like that individual. The image down there of the little girl, that is a completely computer-generated image, but these are the sort of images then could be inserted into virtual reality context. And they could also be used in augmented reality context. So that's the image there of a tablet. So this is an augmented reality application that will place a synthetically generated image of a person, which could be a child, make that person appear to be in your living room or in your bedroom. So you can see again how these might be exploited in child abuse offending. There's also a number of XR games out there that sexualize children. I talked earlier about the adult XR games, and we came across a number of games that that use childlike avatars in sexualized content. So this is one here, Let's Play with Nane, where the individual is viewing content in virtual reality that features an animated female who appears to be underage, and at the same time syncing what they are seeing with a surrogate object. So it could be, in this case, a kind of a blow-up sex doll, but it could just be a pillow, so it's used as a masturbatory device. So in terms of how you then keep children safe in these kinds of contexts, one option is to prevent them from accessing it. So there are some attempts by Meta to introduce parental control measures, but they're only for over 13s because, as I said earlier, these platforms state that their headset should be used by under 13. So they kind of assume that every user is over 13, even though they're not. It is possible to do age restriction, age assurance, identity verification These devices collect an enormous amount of data, and it's possible to kind of identify individual users through this data. So it is possible to do age assurance identity verification, but this is not implemented. And if it were implemented, it does raise a whole range of issues around security and privacy, which raise other challenges. Another way that you might keep children safe is through user empowerment. So there are blocking and reporting mechanisms in social VR and other VR spaces, but they're not particularly user-friendly, and they also rely on the individual, the user, recognizing that the behavior that they're experiencing is something that is harmful or damaging. And in the case of grooming, for example, this could be seen by a child as being a normal, friendly behavior, at least to start off with, and therefore they would not necessarily think to block or report it. Another issue that we identified is that the amount of advice and education that's out there, both for parents and for children who might use this, is very small. So we need to think carefully about kind of adequate education and advice out there.
Emma,
yep.
1 minute?
1 minute, yes, nearly there. So the final ways that you might think about keeping children safe is content moderation. So in social VR spaces, you could have a human moderator as in that, but that isn't possible to scale up within VR. So people are talking about automated moderation, but this is extremely challenging just in a traditional 2D language environment. It becomes ever more complex when you've then got non-verbal behavior to start considering as well. And finally, there are some issues that I think we need to think about around investigating and prosecuting crimes in virtual reality. The virtual reality experience is an ephemeral experience, so there's no meaningful digital footprint recorded unless the user is recording what's going on, and most people will not record what's going on as a matter of routine. So if you want to read a little bit more about what we've been doing, we'll put these links in the chat. There's a report that we issued last year, and then an updated report that we put together with the We Protect Global Alliance earlier this year as well, where you can read more about the research and the implications.
Thanks a lot, Emma. So our next speaker is Lynsay Shepherd, and we will keep all Q&A and all questions for the end, if that's okay with everyone.
So just double checking if you're with me, if everybody can see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Yep, all good, perfect. I'll kick off. So thanks everyone for coming along today and inviting me along here. So I'm Dr. Lynsay Shepherd from Abertay University in Dundee in Scotland, and I'm going to talk a little bit today just about romance fraud and the challenges and opportunities around emerging technologies. So as you can see, my talk is titled From Virtual Bliss to Virtual Betrayal, the growing threat of romance fraud in VR spaces. So yeah, just a little bit about myself before I proceed with the rest of the talk. So I'm a lecturer in cybersecurity and human-computer interaction here at Abertay in Dundee. And in terms of my research interests, my main focus is around usable security. So there's lots of great security tools out there to help keep people safe, but they can be quite difficult to use. So part of my research looks at how we can make that experience a bit better. I also do a little bit of eye tracking as well. So if you're designing security tools and you're showing something to a user on the screen, do they actually bother looking at it, or do they just glance away? I've got a focus on web technologies as well. So I teach web development. Also interested in serious games. So again, that's around providing some education to the public around cybersecurity. And then there's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So looking at how we can combat and tackle romance fraud, how we detect it, and how we can harness the power of machine learning. So just an overview of what the talk is going to cover. So romance fraud has gained momentum in recent years. So fraudsters create fictitious personas on dating platforms, and then they lure unsuspecting victims into this fictitious relationship in an attempt to try and defraud them. So this type of fraud can be particularly devastating. It's not just the loss of a relationship that the victim suffers, but there can be a huge monetary cost as well. So as technology advances, there's new challenges that emerge with the rise of likes of virtual reality, extended reality, and the metaverse. So this talk will explore the phenomenon of romance fraud, the impact on victims, and how these technologies present some kind of new challenges for online dating. With that in mind, I'll cover what romance fraud is, how it works, the impact it can have, and then I'll go on to describe some of the work that we're doing here at Abertay in this space, before then considering how emerging technologies will help the crime evolve in the future. So let's get started. So what is romance fraud? As I mentioned before, it's a form of social engineering where fraudsters will create a fake profile online on the likes of dating platforms, sometimes social media as well, and they'll try and strike up a relationship with potential victims. The end goal is usually always conning the victim out of money. And sometimes it's not just a small amount of money, it's quite often it's a large amount of money. The resultant damage can be quite devastating, and there's the huge emotional impact as well. It's not a new crime. It's actually been around for at least 20 years. However, it is becoming more of a growing problem. As you can probably imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic had quite an impact. So just over 3 years ago, most of the world went into lockdown. People were quite stressed. We'd never been through anything like this before. People were lonely, and they turned to online dating platforms. How exactly do these scams work? So that the execution typically follows several steps. As I mentioned before, the scammer sets up a profile, whether that be on an online dating platform, might be social media as well. Quite often they just pretend to be a fictitious entity. Occasionally you'll get them pretending to be a celebrity or a figure of authority, but they're usually a bit easier to spot. Now, once this profile's been created, the scammer then reaches out to potential victims to try and lure someone into an online conversation. Once that conversation has been established, the conversation between the perpetrator and the victim grows, and it moves to another channel. So the reason that is done is to move away from the dating platform, away from that control, and then onto other platforms such as instant messaging or text, even email. So it's less likely to be detected by the dating platform. The justification that scammers quite often give for this type of behaviour is that it's a really deep relationship. We now don't need to have the overview of the dating platform. We're okay on a private channel. From there, there's then an agreement phase. So again, that relationship is built up further and further, and eventually the victim will be asked for some sort of financial support. So quite often the scammer will say that they're incurring some large medical expenses, they need plane tickets, there's issues with inheritance fees, family emergencies. There's quite a few typical red flags to look for. And from there, some victims are just scammed the once, some are scammed repeated times because they think it is a genuine relationship. So it has quite an impact. Victims of romance fraud have the double hit, so the loss of the relationship and the loss of money. So individual losses can be quite substantial. There was an article on the BBC in 2021 where somebody lost around £300,000. Others lose smaller amounts, but we're hearing more and more stories of people basically losing their life savings. And quite often, the emotional loss or side of things is quite often seen as more impactful than actually just losing money, which is quite surprising. There can also be a bit of turmoil in the victim's family as well. If someone has to come forward and confess to their kids that they have perhaps lost their life savings, lost inheritance, that can turn families against each other. As a result, victims are actually often quite embarrassed as well, to the point that it's an underreported crime because they don't want to come forward, or they don't really know who to turn to. So there have been some campaigns out there to try and tackle romance fraud. So law enforcement have run a number of campaigns, as have dating platforms themselves. So they typically run these campaigns around Valentine's Day. We see them every year. And they give some general advice around online dating and the warning signs to look out for so that you don't get caught up in a romance fraud. But year after year, the same advice appears, but romance fraud is still growing. Other outlets try and give quite vague advice or even specific case studies, but each romance fraud is quite unique. So it can be quite difficult for users to figure out how they would apply these mitigations to themselves in particular circumstances. Not only that, but people that are potentially getting caught up in romance frauds in the early stages, they won't necessarily want to listen to these campaigns. They think they're in a real relationship and they won't hear otherwise. So it can be a bit of a challenge to try and figure out how to communicate with potential victims. So we've recognised that this is a bit of an issue, which leads me to the work that we're carrying out at Abertay. So we've got an ongoing PhD project, so Broken Hearts, Empty Accounts, Preventing Online Romance Fraud. We're looking at harnessing the power of machine learning to try and create a support-based system that will flag up romance fraud cues in a conversation. So this is something that could run on the dating platforms themselves, or could actually be extended to the other platforms that scammers try and lure victims to. So run against texts or emails, other messaging apps. So we're currently just finishing up year one. We've got a little prototype running that is able to flag up what might be red flags in a conversation. The next step is to then figure out how we best communicate that with someone that might be in the process of becoming a victim. So basically to catch them before they lose money or end up further hurt. From there, we'll be drawn on the likes of persuasion and interface design literature to figure out how best to frame these messages to actually catch people's attention. So as I said, that's just in progress, and we should have a larger prototype in place in the next 6 months. So I've mentioned machine learning. Obviously, that's quite a growing field at the moment. It's never out of the news. But the likes of emerging technologies such as the Metaverse, VR, XR, also is having an impact around romance fraud. So just a quick definition of what the Metaverse is. So a network of interconnected virtual worlds with the following key characteristics: so presence, persistence, immersion, and interoperability. The Metaverse is the next iteration of internet enabled by several converging technologies such as extended reality, and virtual reality falls under that umbrella. AI, ledger technologies, neurotechnologies, optics, biosensing technologies, robotics, computer graphics, hardware, and network capabilities. So I'll touch on a few of these actually in relation to what next for romance fraud. So just kind of touching on what Emma mentioned in her talk, there's a lot of discussion around safety in extended reality or VR environments. So it's a growing area of interest, but there's quite a lot of challenges to address in this space. So safeguarding of people, the stopping of malicious activities, again, linking back to Emma's talks, the same applies not just to children, but to adults as well, to keep them safe. If people are spending more and more time in a VR world, is there a way of getting them to authenticate? Again, this kind of leads into age verification as well. How best to design the interface and the environment as well to keep people safe. So again, this actually links back to what Emma said, issues with private spaces, who's allowed in these spaces as well. So some of this feeds into VR and online dating. So let's just consider it in the context of virtual reality and what that means for users. So it means that they can potentially interact in different spaces. There can be a central location for virtual characters to meet, and then private spaces around that. Depending on the environment, it may provide a more realistic experience. So many people relied on Zoom dates during the pandemic, which quite a few people found a bit awkward. It might be easier for them to meet and chat with other people if they're presenting themselves as an avatar. So actually back in 2021, there was quite a lot of talk around Tinder's metaverse and dating ambitions. They purchased a company called Hyperconnect with a focus on AI and augmented reality. And the general idea behind that is that they wanted to create a place for singles to meet in a virtual space. So they actually tried this out, a place called Single Time, and they trialed it in South Korea. Relatively positive reviews from some college campuses there. But there's been a lot of talk about limitations with the metaverse VR technologies in the current form. Obviously, there's issues with the economy as well. So Match Group, they didn't make quite as much money in the last year, so they've actually scaled back these plans. That said, what they're talking about isn't exactly a new idea. There was a paper at CAI in 2022 just examining some of the challenges around VR dating applications. And if you even think back to the virtual online space of Second Life, back in 2010, they've actually had an online dating agency in a virtual space. So additional emergent technologies can be used in conjunction with VR as well, which will create a more realistic and immersive environment. So in these spaces, if it's more realistic, they're likely to be more immersed, more invested in the relationship. It's previously been mentioned that the likes of bystanders could flag troubling behaviour in these spaces online. It might be worth trying to keep users in public spaces rather than off in private side rooms, just so that there's at least someone monitoring what's going on in terms of the conversations. But if it's more immersive, more realistic, there's the risk that people will get more and more invested. So if it's a scammer victim relationship, it might be perceived as much more real than it actually is compared to just standard online dating platforms. I'm just conscious of the time. We've got a couple more slides to go, so I'll try and make this quick. Just drawing on some of the new technologies as well, so that can be used in conjunction with virtual reality. Emma touched on this too. So there's a tool that Unreal have released. So Unreal is a games engine. They've got a tool that they've recently released called Metahuman, where you can essentially scan a face and create realistic human assets. And you can actually import these into VR. So again, a more realistic online dating environment. The same goes for deep fakes as well. So harnessing the power of AI, which again puts a face to the scammer, they seem realistic, and the victim might not realize that they're necessarily being scammed. Just what does the future hold here? So it's difficult to predict. Romance fraud is still a problem, even though that online dating platforms have currently scaled back a bit from dealing with some of these emerging technologies. It's likely that they'll probably move to VR eventually, once the economy recovers and the parameters of the metaverse are a bit more defined. So if that's the case, we'll still need to be ready to protect users in these spaces. So just a few key takeaways as I round up. Romance fraud is a growing cyber-enabled fraud. There's a huge impact on victims, just emotionally and in terms of monetary loss as well. It can be really difficult to communicate the risk to victims once they're invested. Emerging technologies such as VR pose quite a lot of challenges regarding how we keep people safe, But actually, there's quite a lot of opportunities as well in the growth of online dating platforms. That said, we do need to be able to tackle crime across these different platforms. And I think the final message here is that cooperation is needed. So it shouldn't just be the platforms themselves working in a silo trying to address this. I think more cooperation is needed between academia, law enforcement, platforms and policymakers. So thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to take them at the end of the session. If you're interested in the work that we're doing here at Abertay, please get in touch and drop me an email. My PhD student is currently looking for some study participants, and we're keen to talk with law enforcement, researchers and platforms. So thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Lynsay. And our third speaker today is Melvin from the University of Glasgow.
Hi, I'm just share my screen now. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Nice. Let me just move this out of the way. Hi, I'm Melvin. I'm a PhD student from the Serious Research Lab based in the University of Glasgow. So this morning, I'm going to talk to you a bit about my research, as it's titled here. I'll be talking about the implications of extended reality, or it's abbreviated here as XR, on privacy, on security, and behavior. Oops. Interesting. Okay, so some backgrounds into XR is that these devices have a very large sensing capabilities. When you compare them to your smartphones, they may have similar sensors, or if not the exact same sensors, but the differences between these devices is that they have different characteristics. XR devices are designed for prolonged use. An example that's quite easy to understand is when your phone's not in use, for example, it's in your pocket. When your XR glasses are not in use, they're still in your face, collecting the same amount of data as if they were in use. So when we're talking about the sensing capabilities, one thing is that we're not just talking about sensing the user, we're also sensing the things around the user. As much as we're collecting when the user moves their hand to move their hand on their virtual character. But it's also stuff like, for example, this example, your front camera data to present information in the world around you. So collecting data just doesn't stop with the user. Like I mentioned, it's also their surroundings. An app that places furniture in the user space, it needs to know the dimensions and the shape of the space the user's in. It makes no sense to not know the location that you're in. But the thing is, a 3D scan of the room that you're in also gives information about the room that you're in. It collects the documents that are on surfaces. It collects sensitive information that's around the room. Somebody could be in the room, maybe getting changed, and they don't realize that they're being recorded this whole time. But the thing is, as a few examples here will show, these devices come with a number of sensors, such as eye tracking capabilities. So previous work has shown that a vast range of information can be inferred through eye tracking, such as your current emotions, your feelings, your mental state, even your sexuality. Do you look at more men than women? Do you look at more women than men? A lot of this information is very easy to forget that you're giving away. However, a lot of these sensors are being used because that's what the app needs. The solution here is not, let's forbid using access to these sensors. It's let's come up with a smarter way of these apps having access to this data, but then still protecting users while this is happening. An app that places, like the example I gave, the app that places a sofa in the living room, needs to know what your living room looks like. An app that places filters on people around you needs to have access to your front camera. An app that provides real-time subtitles needs to have access to your microphone. So this raises the question, what are some of the risks of this? What are some of the challenges in relation to data collection and privacy, to security, to behavior, but also influencing behavior? So for that, I decided this, I ran a few focus groups with experts in the area of security, privacy, and XR. So we had people from all over the area. So we had people from academia, we had people from industry, we had people who are designers, people who are security experts, people that do work in this area. And then we covered these three topics. So we covered data collection and privacy, we talked about security, behavior, influences. And then through this, I created a formal list of challenges. And then through that, I produced some recommendations of my opinions on how to solve these challenges, and some of the opinions of the experts I interviewed, and then a list of future work. So the way we did this is that, like I mentioned, we had these three topics. In each topic, we had an ideas generation activity, which everyone took part in, and then a discussion at the end. And then this was repeated again for the other two topics. So the ideas generation activity looked a bit like this. They had 3 questions to answer, and the experts collaborated in answering what are some of the issues in this topic. So what are some of the current methods and mitigations that exist? What are your thoughts and opinions? And they would answer using these sticky notes that everyone would see. And then afterwards, they would discuss their answers. And then this would be repeated for the other 2 topics of security and then behavior. So what did we find here? One issue that we found was the unprecedented scale and extent of XR data that's being captured. The users are not aware of what data is being collected, and even worse, when the data was being collected. Users just didn't realize how sensitive their data is. For example, if you allow a navigation app to access your location in front of the camera to then overlay directions in front of your eyes, it's very easy to forget that the app now has access to your front camera, which means they can also access who's around you. In theory, we have no idea that these apps could also be running facial recognition to identify people around you, combined with your location, and then also the timestamp this happened. You could also monitor the whereabouts of people within a city, creating a state of creating a surveillance state. And then another challenge is access protections to facilitate awareness and transparency. Users are not aware of why their data they were providing is being collected in the first place. We have some solutions for this in non-XR domains through license agreements or icons. But the thing is, no one reads these or no one understands them. That's one of the main issues here. So these XR headsets need to be transparent about the data that's being captured and then the use that it's for. It's very easy for, to imagine from a manufacturer's point of view that it's cheaper to process data externally rather than on the headset. It's less components that produces a cheaper headset, which more people buy. But obviously this idea, there's no guarantee of what's happening to your data. You have no idea if it actually is being collected for what they're telling you it's being collected for. So then this also adds to risks in cross reality, so in XR and outside of XR. So as my presenters before this also mentioned, there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of identity theft that could happen. There's a lot of spoofing that could happen. This data, just by its nature, is extremely easy to track. For example, if a user in VR with their controller is inputting a PIN code, beforehand, you would need to know what the PIN code is. Now, all you need to know is where the user's controllers were in that 3D space. Record that and then replay that later on. So so you're almost bypassing conventional PIN code attacks here. because you don't need them. You just need to know where the hand was. Another example is if you were driving wearing these glasses, for example, what's stopping an application for placing a huge pop-up to block your vision of the road? That's a very dangerous thing to happen. And this is not an issue that we actually had beforehand. You could have a navigation app on your phone. You could have a pop-up, but you're still looking forward. You can choose not to look at the app. But it's a lot harder when it's in front of your eyes, right there. And then, so I also spoke about the manipulation of thoughts, actions, and behaviors. So the sensitivity of behavioral data. What were you feeling before or after you made a purchase? Are you more likely to choose one product when you're feeling a certain emotion than another? I mentioned earlier that these headsets have the capability to detect your mental state. What happens if this data is sold to third parties, such as insurance companies? Like what happens with non-XR data? We have an example of a lot of metadata can be collected about a person or is provided by people through non-XR means. But now, what if this data is just being collected in general and then can be inferred? It's almost like another level on top of the data collection that we've seen already at a much greater scale. There's no rules or regulations on this currently, which is problematic, but this is why we do the research now and not when it's too late after the fact. And then this section about perception of yourself and other people. There's an issue currently in XR where you don't know what other people are doing to you. There's nothing stopping someone from walking down the street wearing XR glasses, applying a skin color changing filter onto other people. You have no idea that's happening, and they have no reason to stop this unethical behavior. But also, like the previous speakers mentioned, it's you applying augmentations onto yourself, onto other people, can have an incredible negative impact. Even, for example, as children, it's not hard to imagine the easier opportunities this creates for bullying, placing maybe a sticker above someone's head saying loser, and they have no idea it's happening, or even creating unrealistic beauty standards. What if every time you set specific filters on yourself, that when other people look through AR glasses, they see this version of you and not the version you are, which is extremely problematic in non-XR domains, let alone in this one where it's all just almost on steroids. And then this last thing is just this is the biggest issue currently that fundamentally changes how we approach security and privacy in XR. The issues that exist in other domains still exist here. Like I just mentioned, a lot of these problems still happen in non-XR devices, but the issue is they're amplified and made so much worse in this context. The example I mentioned earlier about camera access on your phone. If an attacker got access to your front camera on your phone, that's only useful when you're using the phone. When it's away on the table or on your pocket, it's all you see is black denim. The same attack to the front camera of your headset, obviously that's a much greater problem. Even when you're not using the device, the attacker still has access to what you're seeing, those around you. Maybe data's being collected that you actually had no idea about. So I talk about this idea of just data access. This really does need to be rethought in the quantity of this increased quantity and quality of XR data that's being collected. One example is the permission systems that currently are in place for XR devices. They've been moved directly from Android phones straight into XR devices. It's really a copy and paste. But the thing is, both of these devices have different use cases, or slightly different use cases. They have different capabilities. There's different consequences for specific actions, like I mentioned. One way that permission systems got around data access or giving how much data was, they introduced session-based data access options. So this is options like only at this time, or only allow once. These work well, yes, when sessions of app sessions are quite short or finite. But the issue is in XR, the whole idea is that it's always on. There's always data being collected. There's always some sort of processing happening. These sessions are a lot longer, or if not indefinite. And so this is, the current data access models just do not work or are not appropriate for this area. So this is my final slide. If you were to take anything from this presentation, is that there's a lot of work to do. Users are just not aware of what data is being collected, when it's being collected, how much is being collected, why the data is being collected. There's, as I mentioned earlier, XR devices, they have a large scale and scope for collecting extremely, extremely detailed bits of information just through quantity or quality. Even though the sensors might be the same as non-XR devices, it's a whole different ballgame that we're playing here. For example, behavioral data, we're adding a whole new dimension onto data collection. We're giving data at a much higher quality with a lot less steps to infer. And then I hope you understand through this presentation, copy and pasting non-XR solutions for XR problems, this is not the answer. Like I mentioned just now, the problems exist, but they're a lot worse. So we can't expect the same solutions to work for a much bigger problem. And I'll be happy to talk a bit more about this because I realize I'm out of time, but that's my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Melvin, and thanks also to Emma and Lynsay. I think it's been a very, very interesting panel. I've learned a lot for sure. We only have a few minutes left, but we have had some questions. We have received some questions in the chat from participants. So let's answer one of them that is directed to the three of you. So if each of you can answer in just 1 minute, then we can move to the second panel. How can we access or generate data to better understand the extent and nature of the use of virtual reality or extended reality in crime? So it's a question about data access and data generation.
Should I go first?
Yeah, please.
And I mean, this question actually speaks to a big problem, which is how do you collect empirical data about some of these phenomena? The things that we're kind of thinking about are observational studies, so kind of participant observation, if you like, in some of these spaces. But the other way is kind of survey data and interviews with users. And there have been a small number of studies that have done this across a whole range of different extended reality harms, but it's still a very small number of studies, and it tends to be kind of opportunity samples. So I think what we need is a more rigorous approach to thinking about who we're sampling and what we're asking and why. And it is the number one question that, for instance, regulators will ask. If you talk to, so when we've talked to regulators about harms in extended reality, they say, yes, but where's the empirical evidence? Can you generate some kind of solid evidence for us?
Yeah, I'll just echo that. It is something it's very difficult to get hold of data in some circumstances. So yeah, survey data about how people use the platforms, and yeah, observation around how people interact with others, or even the steps that they take to try and protect themselves if they think that they might be or might come to harm in these spaces.
But I'd like to add also just how, the idea is very difficult, but it's also hard for people to say what they don't know. Obviously these technologies are not as common as we use smartphones, for example. People know or are starting to know a lot of issues that exist, but how do you ask someone who's never used XR or used XR only in this tiny narrow of what the whole capabilities are, for example, problems that may exist or how to solve them? I feel like it's a very difficult challenge. I don't actually know what the solution is to that, other than maybe we're doing it a bit early, but yeah.
I'd add one other thing, that just a plug for something that Sprite Plus is funding, which is about to kick off, which is some experimental work. So looking at how people interact with different types of avatars in virtual reality. So whether they're cartoonish or whether they're more kind of human-like, and see what that kind of says about trust relationships.
Thanks. So I think we're running out of time, and if someone is to blame, it's myself, because I haven't been a very good chat. We also had another question, but we will not have time to answer, but I will just ask it here in case, so that we can all start thinking about it and have a chat afterwards. It's about the use of virtual reality and extended reality for crime prevention. So looking at the other side of the coin. And the person specifically asked about training law enforcement, witness testimony in courts, educating the public, and other types of activities we could use this type of tools for. So again, thank you very much, Emma, Lynsay, and Melvin, for being here today. It's been a very good panel. Now we will take a 1-minute break, and then the second panel will get started.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Nick Lord. I'm a professor of criminology at the University of Manchester, and I'm also the director of the Centre for Digital Trust and Society at the University of Manchester. And I'm very pleased today to be chairing this panel for SecRev on showcasing cybercrime research at the University of Manchester. So if you were in the previous session, you may have seen David there already, but we'll be hearing from David again in this session, where I'll be speaking about some of his research on the digital harms of smart home devices. We'll then hear from Meropi Tzanetakis, who will be speaking about self-regulation versus policing darknet drug platforms. And finally, we'll hear from Yuanyuan Zhang, who will be speaking about transitions in the cryptocurrency market, looking at evidence from the Russia-Ukraine war. So in terms of structure, each presenter will have around 15 minutes each. We'll work our way through the presentations and save Q&A for the last 15 minutes or so. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and I can relay those to the presenters at the end. Otherwise, without further ado, I'll pass straight over to David to start his presentation.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I guess you cannot hear me because I've been talking before. I'll share my screen now with some slides. Can you see them?
Yeah, we can see it now, David.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thank you again to the organizers for putting together this conference. And also thank you, Yuanyuan and Meropi, for agreeing to participate in this panel. I think my presentation is going to be the least exciting one for sure, because the next ones are going to be, they seem to be very, very interesting. And I'll need to leave at 10:30. So if any, because I'm attending another meeting later. So if someone has questions and we don't have time to answer them later, please send me an email and we can have a chat about this paper. So I'll be presenting a piece of work I did with loads of researchers based across different universities. It was about digital harms of smart home devices. We did a systematic literature review that eventually got published, so the article is already available in open access if someone was interested. And this paper was funded by PETRAS, which is the UK National Centre for Cybersecurity of IoT devices. Just to say a little bit about my collaborators, Stephen Kemp is a researcher in criminology based in Girona in Spain. Stephanie Quenzel is an electrical engineer in Royal Holloway University of London. Lynn Coventry is a psychologist, but she works in cybersecurity. Sami Sakari and Daniel Tilly are both private consultants working in different domains. Sami mainly in computer security and Daniel Tilly in defense. And James Nicholson was the PI of the project. He is a computer scientist at Northumbria University. So as you will see, it's a very cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary team of researchers, and this is also reflected in how we address this problem. And so I'll be talking a little bit about that later. The content of my presentation, first of all, I will present a little bit on the growth of IoT and specifically focusing on home settings. So how Internet of Things devices are more and more used in households, and what are the implications of this in positive terms, what benefits it can bring to our everyday life, but also what are the challenges to our security and our privacy and the privacy of our data. And then more specifically, and that's something I will explain later, we wanted to know exactly what research has found regarding the digital harms of the uptake of those devices in home settings. So we have heard a lot in the news, loads of, some pieces of evidence here and there about specific types of harms that have been linked with the use of those devices, that we wanted to bring all evidence together and present an overarching introduction to this problem, so that anyone reading just a few pages in a research paper can better understand what is the extent of the problem and what are the main types of harms. This was challenging to do, as I will explain later, but that's what we tried to do in this paper. Yes, a very quick introduction to IoT for those of you that haven't heard this concept before, and I'm sure that's going to be none of you, but just an introduction. So when we embed when we embed sensors and software to connect physical devices to the internet, and also to connect physical devices to each other, and I'm talking about things like a fridge or a vacuum cleaner or a TV or our laptop or our mobile phone, and that's when we are embedding Internet of Things in our household. When we do this at home, that's when we talk about smart homes or smart home devices more generally. And this can be applied to basically any type of device we have in our house, from plugs to light bulbs to security systems, voice assistants like Amazon Alexa and similar types of devices, smart TVs, and now smart meters, and that are really being very much rolled out in the UK. And the objective is that every single household by 2025 will have smart devices at home, specifically will have smart meters at home. So this is a challenge that is becoming more and more pressing for researchers to understand before they are completely rolled out in every single household. These devices are connected via router to our smartphones. We can track their data and also activate and deactivate them. And also we can access their information via browser on the internet. The use of IoT is increasing worldwide. And we have some statistics from the US that say that in 2022, over 65% of households owned a smart device, but this is likely to be an underestimate. And in the UK in 2021, over half of the population had a smart TV, and there will be a complete rollout of smart meters that are connected to the internet, meter readers, and by 2025. We don't want to say that this is negative, so there's loads of benefits associated with the use of IoT devices at home, such as the detection of dangerous events. So if we think, for example, of security systems connected to the internet, it's going to be easier for anyone to make sure no one is trying to access our home. Or if we have fire emergency systems connected to the internet, it's also going to be easier for these systems to connect with fire emergency services in case of a fire in our house. There's also some papers showing that there's an overall reduction in energy consumption, because users can know how much energy they are using and make smart decisions about energy consumption, which is linked with financial benefits for families and households. And also in some cases, there's an easier interaction between family members and users. But and that's not us saying it, there's been some research already about that. This uptake in IoT devices at home is also associated with different challenges. The main challenge is that they record loads of private, sensitive, and security critical information about each of us, and they do this basically constantly, not only at one point in time, but basically they record data, many different snapshots every now and then, and this information can be used for unintended consequences, right? So the information can be released, if it's accessed either legally or illegally by someone we don't want that they access this information. This information can be later used for ransom attacks, for example, but also if certain information is falsified or controlled, it can be used to activate fire alarms. Therefore, all neighbors in a building would leave the building, and that would be used for people to break in and commit burglary, and other types of harms that can be linked with those devices. But all the evidence we have so far is very is based on a few number of cases, or even computer experiments that predict what may happen based on the type of data that's being recorded. But we have very little information about what is actually happening, whether there's actually digital harms taking place at the moment. So this is why we wanted to do this paper, to synthesize what research has found regarding digital harms of smart homes. We have three main aims: classify digital harms, and I will explain how we did that; identify which specific smart home devices and attributes have been studied in research in relation to these digital harms; and explore what researchers propose in terms of policy and socio-technical approaches to mitigate those possible harms. So these were our three objectives. How we classified harms. So basically, we accessed the literature and we realized that different disciplines, disciplinary domains were using very different classifications of online harms. And we didn't want to be exclusive to any of those. So we created a classification, a taxonomy that brings together three different classifications. One based on the nature of harms, the other one on the objective of the harms, and the third one on the method of the harms. So if we just look at the nature, we can distinguish cyber-dependent crimes or harms are those that can only be committed through the internet. They don't have an equivalent offline mode. For example, malware, denial of service, hacking attacks. We study whether those can happen or take place in IoT devices at home, cyber-enabled harms, and these do have equivalent modes, but increase in reach or scale because of the use of those devices, or may increase in reach of scale because of the use of those devices, and they can be fraud, stalking, grooming, and other types of incidents. Then we also look at those potential harms regarding their objective, whether they refer to the crossing of invisible boundaries of ownership, cyber trespass, deception or theft, which is mainly fraud, identity theft, digital piracy. So those harms that seek to obtain criminal profits, cyber porn and obscenity, so pornography, sexual services, online child sexual exploitation, and others, and cyber violence such as stalking, harassment, or terrorism. And then regarding the method, whether they refer to the release of sensitive information, the authentication, or the access. I have different things popping up in my screen, so I'm moving. Or the access, unauthorized access to control systems. So each of those different types of harms can have different implications for our everyday life, and therefore the consequences or the implications for prevention are also going to be very different. So we wanted to know if researchers have found mostly harms at the intersection of these three different types of classifications. And I will show some graphs later about that. How we did that? So we wanted to synthesize all existing literature, and that was challenging because, as you may imagine, there were loads of papers published in this domain, and we had to be very, very restrictive in terms of what we included in the systematic review. And what we did, we followed Prisma protocol, which is quite accepted for this type of systematic literature reviews, and we recorded all articles with a set of inclusion criteria and published between 2011 and 2021. In terms of inclusion criteria, we wanted to include all empirical articles that analyze either security or privacy implications of smart homes, but using only empirical data, which meant we excluded all theoretical pieces, technical notes, reviews of the literature, and we also excluded all pieces that related to IoT use in other settings, such as cities, healthcare, and public transportation, and so on and so forth. We reviewed two different databases, Scopus and Web of Science, using these keywords. If someone has a question about that, we can talk about that later. Many articles came out of this search. So we asked two reviewers in our team, I was one of them, to read through all titles and abstracts and select only those that met different criteria. So the main focus had to be on smart devices. They had to explore digital harms specifically, and they had to use real data and be available in English. Then to ensure that different judges or reviewers came up with the same classification and the same agreement, we asked 5 additional reviewers to look at 100 citations, and then we checked if different judges were considering different papers. And overall, the integrated reliability was moderate strong. So we were happy with that. After excluding papers, we selected 63 papers that met all our criteria, and then we read through them and selected information. So just an overview of which studies were eventually selected. We see that there's an increase over time, which is not surprising. Also, bear in mind that data was recorded in October 2021, so the ratio of articles per month was larger in 2021. So we see a growing interest to this domain. Regarding the disciplinary background of the main author of these papers, is mainly from computer science and computer engineering, and very little presence of social sciences and humanities in this type of research. And regarding the... Yes?
2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Nick. I need to go quicker. So regarding the countries of authors and funding bodies, mainly USA and China, but also the European Union and the UK are well represented. I only have 2 minutes, so I will skip through them descriptive statistics and go directly into the main part of the analysis. Regarding the types of harms identified in research, we see that most articles focus on privacy intrusions and hacking. There's also some research about malware and denial of service attacks, and very little on stalking. Then we wanted to make sure that these researchers are talking to cases that actually happen in the real world. And that's what our inclusion criteria was intended to do, but we wanted to double check it again. So we took real world cases published in the media, published in court cases, etc., in each of these types of harms. And we identified cases that have been published or have been reported to the police across a set of countries. And this is how we classified harms at the intersection of cyber-dependent, cyber-enabled, according to the nature and according to the method. So the majority of research is focusing on cyber-dependent harms, mainly related to access and confidentiality. And there are important gaps in research about other types of harms that may also take place in this area. Then what we did is try to access other real-world data in these gaps in research, covering this type of research, and then we found that there's already cases going on at this type of intersection of classifications. So we identified a set of gaps in research that future research will need to cover. The majority of researchers were interested in these types of devices: security and surveillance, lighting control, and voice control systems. And then we wanted to know specifically for each of those devices, which types of harms were most commonly identified. So we see, for instance, that for security and surveillance, denial of service attacks were more commonly identified. And for lighting control and smart bulbs, hacking was more commonly identified. And for voice control system, hacking as well. And then we also record the data about the type of data linked with those harms. So for security and surveillance systems, it was mostly network traffic data that was being targeted by offenders, and lighting control and smart bulbs, not network traffic data, voice control devices, audio data types. Just some information. This is mainly for developers, so they know which types of harms are being linked with which type of data in which device. Regarding the recommendations posed by authors.
Sorry, David, can you wrap up soon?
Yes.
You're over 16 minutes now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yes, so some general conclusions. The use of smart devices is growing very quickly. Most studies focus on the privacy side of things, but also there's also research on hacking, malware, and denial of service attacks. And we identified a set of gaps of research. So if there's PhD students and early career researchers in the room, you can target some of those that no one has covered before. The article is published in open access, so if you're interested, you can access it here. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry I went over time, Nick.
Yeah, no problem, David. Thank you for the presentation. Anyone in the room, I would encourage you to read the paper and perhaps contact David directly if you have any questions or comments, given that he has to leave in 10 minutes. But otherwise, we'll move on to Meropi. So over to you, Meropi, to share your screen and begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Nick. Can you see my first slide?
We can. It's currently, there we are, sorted.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Meropi Tzanetakis. I'm a lecturer in digital criminology at the University of Manchester, and I have the pleasure to present you a paper today called Self-Regulation versus Policing of Darknet Drug Platforms. And I would like to, start with the aim of the paper. The aim is to explore the social organization of darknet drug platforms. And before I start with the content, I would like to briefly sorry, I have to close the window. I would like to define the term, what are darknet drug platforms, or the term crypto markets. Crypto markets is also used in the literature. So both terms are used interchangeably, meaning the same things. Crypto markets to offer the infrastructure, which is the digital platform itself, in order to mediate between a variety of different actors. Could be the buyers, could be the sellers, could be law enforcement, could be moderators, and of course also researchers, as well as people interested into this crypto market environment. And crypto markets or darknet drug platforms have been described as a criminal innovation because for the first time they did bring together two different types of software technologies. One is anonymizing software like the Tor browser with which the darknet can be accessed. And the other one is cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Most of you might be familiar with Bitcoin. So cryptocurrencies do not allow for anonymous transactions, but they do allow for pseudonymous transactions mainly because of every transaction being conducted with Bitcoin is saved in the public ledger. So what's happening here is that with both technologies, the digital traces people leave are very much limited. So the police is struggling to discover where are struggling to discover where the users are located and what their physical identities are. But most importantly, there is also an offline element included in this crypto market ecosystem, and this is the delivery of the orders placed online. They are the deliveries are actually carried out by very traditional postal services. And here you, in the lower left part of the screen, you'll see a screenshot of a package where you would never imagine that the content of it is illicit drugs. So the postal delivery service kind of acts as a street level drug dealer without knowing, of course. And with this, I would like to move on to theoretical framework with which I would like to explore the social organization of darknet drug platforms. And this is the concept of governance. The concept of governance is divided into two dimensions. The external dimension of governance focuses on how the state and state institutions limit and tackle criminal activities, including policing, sanctioning, and basically how is law enforced on those marketplaces. And then the internal dimension is looking at how our market actors, how do they enable the exchange of drugs, and with which social practices is law enforcement evaded. So when the state is not involved in the organization of a market, how do market actors self-regulate? This is the basic question I'm asking here. Let me briefly talk about the methodology I've been using. I've been conducting multi-sided digital ethnography for a couple of years between 2014 and 2020, where I conducted 28 semi-structured encrypted online interviews, mostly with customers, partly also with sellers. Unfortunately, no platform operator. And I also conducted 16 semi-structured face-to-face interviews, again, mostly with drug users. And I have been monitoring various crypto markets over a couple of years. and also monitored the associated discussion fora where sellers, buyers, and moderators, operators do interact with each other. And then I've also included a web scraping element, which is not part of the digital ethnography, but it's a different methodology, web scraping of market data in order to trace the development of revenues generated on crypto markets, or what are the most popular countries of origin or countries of destination, for example. But let's move on to the external dimension of governance. How are darknet drug platforms policed? And here I would like to introduce two different policing strategies. The first one is the most popular one so far, mainly focusing on closing crypto markets. And I'm going to illustrate this on the example of Silk Road, which pioneered the phenomenon of darknet drug platforms. It started operating in 2011, had a monopoly position, and offered a variety of different drugs for sale, as well as other stolen credit card data, and at the beginning also weapons, but they were later moved on to a different platform. Ever since the beginning of the phenomenon of crypto markets, no child pornographic content was distributed on those platforms, which is defined in the terms and conditions of the platform, and then also negotiated within the community in various discussion fora. And in 2013, there was a large-scale police collaboration led by the FBI, which closed Silk Road. And since then, we have about 24 different crypto markets or darknet drug platforms, which compete for, which offer a variety of features, different languages, different payment systems, different currencies, cryptocurrencies in place, where a variety of sellers compete for a myriad of different customers. And here I'm going to present you a slide with illustrating the development of revenues. Operation Animus was one large-scale police collaboration which successfully closed some of the most popular crypto markets at that time. And you see after the Operation Animus, the revenues dropped immediately. The prices for the drugs also increased, but within a couple of weeks and months, the ecosystem recovered, and you also see that the daily sales volumes started increasing by January 2015, and this observation is consistent for every takedown, every large international police collaboration. So there is a short-term effect where the revenues decrease, the prices increase, but mid-term and probably also long-term, the crypto market ecosystem seems to be quite resilient in the sense of buyers and sellers moving to new crypto markets, to other platforms that become popular again. And the cat and mouse game continues on a different digital platform. And the second policing approach or policing strategy I would like to talk about is Operation Bayonet. It was pioneered with the crypto market Alphabay and Hansa market. What happened was a so-called honeypot approach was followed. So Alphabay was the largest platform operating by then. It was closed by a large international police collaboration. And as we know from previous market closures, customers and vendors moved to another marketplace, which was called Hansa Market, which was about the second most popular at the time. But Hansa Market was already in control of the Dutch police by then. And the Dutch police changed the source code of Hansa Marketplace. It decrypted the messages sent via the platform and changed the security features that would reveal the IP address of the vendors and customers to a Dutch police server. What was the response of the community? Of course, everyone in the community was shocked, but within a couple of weeks and months, again, users adapted their strategies. They changed the PGP keys. Vendors also changed their usernames, which is quite important in order, because they were willing to let their reputation they have built to start from scratch, let's say. So basically, the whole ecosystem adapted and again demonstrated a resilience within the crypto market environment. This was also confirmed by a study that illustrated the sales volumes after Operation Bayonet were recovered after a couple of weeks again. Let's move on to the internal dimension of governance. Now I'm going to be focusing on how to darknet drug platforms self-regulate, and I will be looking at two different aspects. I'm going to skip that because we are running out of time. And I'm going to be focusing on two aspects, but before I will be focusing on the two self-regulatory aspects, I would like to very briefly introduce you to the most important actors here. So usually on drug markets, you have the drug seller and you have the drug buyer. On crypto markets, however, an additional actor enters the scene, and this is the platform operator. And this is important because with the next slide, I'm gonna talk about the platform operator, who acts as a market organizer and is thus in a very powerful position. So the two aspects of self-regulation I'll be focusing on is the element of trust and the element of conflict. So establishing and maintaining trust is key in for markets in general, but especially for anonymous environments online where no personal interactions are possible, and basically the actors have to transact or have to cooperate with another without knowing who their other person is. What was done instead to overcome this trust problem, an institution-based trust-building practice was introduced, which is also embedded in the infrastructure of the platform, and this is the reputation system. The reputation system consists of a very short written message as well as a 5 out of 5 star rating, as you can see here. This is the first aspect, but there is also the reviews are aggregated into a numerical number. Here in the screenshot, you see this vendor has a trust level of 8, which is quite high level, indicating that most customers were quite happy with the services offered, with the services and product offered by this drug seller. So the rating allows for a differentiation between the different sellers, and the rating is also transferable, allows for a transferable element of trust by making the past history of a rating history available to other customers. So the rating history and the aggregated numbers to signal the trustworthiness of a vendor. There is another element which I would like to mention very briefly. This is that the reputation system allows the reputation built within one marketplace, within one crypto market, to be transferred to another crypto market. And this is especially important in order to understand why policing is so difficult, because this transferability of trust, of reputation from one marketplace to another allows the vendors to undermine every policing strategy. How is this done? A drug seller has to submit evidence, information on the reputation they have built on a particular market. They have to submit it with a new platform, and then the platform operator decides if this authenticates if this information is reliable or not.
Meropi, just 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, yeah, I'll be ready in 2 minutes. Thank you, Nick. The second element of self-regulation I would like to talk about is conflicts. So crypto markets are uncertain digital environments as they are prone to irregularities, fraud, scams. They can occur between all actors, the platform operator, the customer, the seller. To deal with potential conflicts between the buyer and the seller, a social technical practice was introduced, the dispute resolution system, which is again embedded in the infrastructure of the marketplace and is linked to the payment system. How does this is called centralized escrow system, how does it work? The platform operator acts as a mediator between the buyer and the seller. The money is not transferred immediately from the customer to the seller, but is transferred to the platform operator, who only releases the funds when the delivery has arrived with the customer. So this makes the platform operator, as you can see, is in a quite powerful position because the platform operator keeps the funds. Of course, there was a lot of misuse in the past. There were some cases where this is called exit scam. There were some cases where the platform operators did keep the funds for a couple of weeks and then left with the funds, closed down the marketplace. So I would like to conclude that darknet drug platforms are a highly dynamic environment, ecosystem. They do adapt to policing strategies quite efficiently. So policing allows so far for very successful short-term effects, but is not in the position to have any significant impact in the medium and probably also long-term. The platform operators act as market organizers by enabling to reduce uncertainty in relation to how trust is established and conflicts are resolved. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions and giving back to Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Meropi. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please place those into the chat and we can relay those to Meropi at the end of the session. But for now, we'll move straight on to our final presentation from Yuanyuan. So over to you to share your screen.
Hi, can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for organizing this conference. My name is Yuanyuan Zhang. I'm a research associate at Center for Digital Trust and Society, University of Manchester. And today I'm going to present on the topic of transitions in the cryptocurrency market, evidence from the Russian-Ukraine war. So over the past decade, digital cryptocurrencies have been exposed to many significant global events, including the financial crisis, economic cycles, the COVID-19 pandemic, and most recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has been defined as the largest attack on a European country since World War II. Cryptocurrencies have played a pivotal role in the war, and it also acted as a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, decentralization, convenience, and cost effectiveness of cryptocurrencies, all these properties will allow the digital asset can be traded easily and quickly, and making it to useful tools to facilitate or transfer the money into the conflict zones. On the other hand, cryptocurrencies may also provide a path for bypassing the economic sanctions. It was cited in the elliptic research that over $200 million worth of crypto donation had made its way to pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian causes. So the key questions for our paper are, how have the cryptocurrency market reacted to the onset of war? How does the network structure and interconnectedness change due to the war-related events? Does the network analysis show any evidence of evading sanctions? So studies investigating the impact of the conflict on cryptocurrencies has remained scarce, and to the best of our knowledge, there has been no literature on investigating how the dynamic network structures and connectedness evolve during the conflict period. One of the closest literature, which is written by Vito Thomas in 2021, who has investigated the dynamic networks of cryptocurrencies during the COVID-19 period. And some other interesting research, which is related to the influence of cryptocurrencies on the war, has been published in the elliptic and chain analysis report. So it was illustrated that since the start of the war, both sides have used blockchain technologies to aid their expenses or facilities or resources. And the money raised by pro-Ukrainian has been over 212 million US dollars through cryptocurrencies, in comparison with the pro-Russian donations, which is only 4.8 million US dollars. A ratio difference is about 44:1. Another interesting finding is most pro-Ukrainian fundraisers have low reliance in Bitcoin, with the most in Ethereum. However, most pro-Russian fundraisers, they prefer to use Bitcoin rather than Ethereum. We downloaded historical daily closing prices of 32 cryptocurrencies in US dollars from Kraken Exchange for the period of 1st of January 2022 to 31st of January 2023. So we choose this specific period is due to the sample period has taken into consideration of the time before and after the start of the war, and this will allow us to analyze how the network topology of the cryptocurrencies evolved through the period. And the 32 cryptocurrencies were selected based on a combination for their ranking in terms of the market capitalizations, trading volume, and the availability of trading consecutively during that period. We also computed the daily log returns of each cryptocurrency for use in the empirical analysis. So in figure 1, it shows the descriptive statistics of the combined daily log returns of the 32 cryptocurrencies over the sample period. As can be seen from this figure, all the cryptocurrencies has a negative mean and skewness value. And from the kurtosis, we can see that cryptocurrencies distribution are more peaked and has a heavier tails compared with the normal distribution. Cryptocurrency market is relatively quite volatile, as the standard deviation value is still quite large. Through the summary statistics of the data, we also find that the minimum return occurred on 11th of May 2022 for 69% of our sample, corresponding to an approximate price decrease of 20%, and the maximum returns was found on 10th of November 2022 for 34% of our sample, corresponding to an approximate price increase of over 15%. So surprisingly, neither the minimum nor the maximum returns happened during the period of the start of the war. So we analyzed the cryptocurrency markets as a financial network, and we follow closely the methodology that being used in Vito Thomas 2021, which is based on the strengths of correlations between the returns of the cryptocurrencies to build the network graphs. And in the network graph, the nodes stands for the individual cryptocurrencies, and the edges are literally the links connect both cryptocurrencies if their returns are significantly correlated. So here we use the Pearson correlation coefficient. If this value is greater than 0.5, then we say these two cryptocurrencies can be denoted as two nodes, and the links between the two cryptocurrencies are the edges. We use a dynamic approach rather than the static approach to construct network graphs for each 30-day rolling window of returns over the entire sample period. The evolution of the network structures will be measured through the centrality measures. So there's no general definitions of centralities in networks. However, there are multiple ways to measure these centrality values in network analysis. Here we implemented two different centrality measures to construct the network graph through the R software with the iGraph package. And the first one is the degree centrality. So it is a measure of the immediate connections within the networks. We compute the number of edges connecting to each node, and in general, a higher degree can be considered as more central to the network. Another approach is betweenness centrality. So we calculate the number of shortest paths and represents the degree to which a node ranks between other nodes. And a higher betweenness can be considered an indicator of the power of cryptocurrencies in terms of information transmission. Oh, okay. So in Figure 2, it shows the evolution of the degree centrality of the individual cryptocurrency and the average market centrality. For clarity, the results are only reported for the major cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and the minor cryptocurrencies, Dogecoin. And we compute the average degree centrality through the mean of the degree centrality for all the cryptocurrencies. And we focus on 4 particular periods, which are the period before and after the start of the war, and also the period when the minimum and maximum returns occurred. So as can be seen from this figure, so before the start of the war, the cryptocurrency markets are relatively interconnected, and immediate after the start of the war, we can see a short increase within in terms of the degree centralities, and the cryptocurrency markets are almost fully connected at this point. And since the March to the beginning of the April, we saw a sharp dip in the degree centrality values. So at this point, it indicates the cryptocurrency markets are significantly disconnected. And through April, the cryptocurrency market exhibits a sharp increase in terms of degree centrality value, which are to a similar level of pre-war period. During the period when the minimum and maximum returns happened, we interestingly found that the cryptocurrency markets are actually fully connected for an extended period, around 1 month for both of the cases. So this is the figure. This figure shows the evolution of the betweenness centrality of the Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Dogecoin, and also the average of all the cryptocurrencies. So again, we can see that before the start of the war, the betweenness centrality value are relatively low, and this indicates that the cryptocurrencies play a really weak influence on the cryptocurrency network. And immediate after the war, we see this value tends towards 0, which indicates there's no there's no cryptocurrencies which are dominated or acted as bridges for other cryptocurrencies. Through April, we see this value start to spike upwards and reach to the first highest point, which indicates that some of the cryptocurrencies, for example, like Litecoin at this point, plays a stronger influence on the cryptocurrencies network. And similar trends can also be seen like before the maximum returns occurred. And another finding from this figure is during the minimum and the maximum returns occurred, the cryptocurrency markets between its centrality value are relatively low, which shows that there's no cryptocurrencies are actually dominated for a period around 1 month. So in this section, we construct the network graph for the cryptocurrency market based on the degree centrality for the period of before the start of the war and also after the start of the war. A brief explanation about the network graphs. So the larger and lighter colored nodes stands for the high centrality, and the smaller, darker nodes stands for the low centrality, and the darker colored edge stands for the strong correlation between two cryptocurrencies, and the lighter colored edges stands for the weak correlations between the two cryptocurrencies. The highlighted section of this time series plot for the average degree centrality represents the specific rolling windows for which we generate the network graphs. So similar results can be found from the networks graphs compared with the centrality measures previously. So before the start of the wars, we can see that all the cryptocurrencies in the markets are relatively interconnected with each other. However, 1 month after the start of the war, we see the cryptocurrency market are significantly disconnected, and some minor cryptocurrencies such as the Dogecoin start to be isolated from other cryptocurrencies. So we can conclude that.
Sorry, 2 minutes. That's all. But you're now in your conclusions. That's fine.
Yes. Yeah. So we can conclude that for the majority of sample periods, the average degree centrality is actually above 25, and this value is greater than what they found in the literature by Thomas 2021. And another finding is the degree centrality peaked at start of the war, which indicates the network is highly interconnected due to this financial crisis. Similar results has been found by Thomas and Kaffer. They showed key events relating COVID-19 showed similar spike to degree centralities. So the effect of the war has similar influence in increasing the herding connectedness and efficiency in the cryptocurrency market. And during the period when the minimum and the maximum returns occurred, we spotted the periods of extended connectedness. So this is a really interesting finding which hasn't been shown from other previous literatures. There's no significant evidence to show that the war-related events occurred during this period has an influence on the connectedness as shown by centrality measures. So further investigations and testings will be required to determine whether these transactions are connected to war-related events, regulations, and sanctions. And moreover, we should look into the transaction data from the decentralized exchange, such as on-chain data, as most of the funds of illicit source like sanctioned entities or cybercrime activities are traded on those platforms. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sorry, I couldn't find my my arrow. Thank you, Yuanyuan, for that presentation. So we have a few minutes spare before the next session for questions. I can't see any in the chat currently, so share those if you do have questions. But maybe quickly, Meropi, a quick question in terms of the governors that you speak of in your governance regime, if you like, and to what extent do you find, or do you think there are tensions that exist between the different objectives that exist for the different governance actors, if that makes sense, and how do they get beyond those? So, for instance, I can imagine external governors have a very different objective to, say, certain kinds of internal governors, whether it's the platform operators or the vendors and the sellers and so on. So to what extent do those tensions that exist play out in the market?
Thank you very much for this question, Nick. The tensions. So, if we look at the literature and how traditional drug markets operate, then there has always been a tension between the law enforcement, for example, between the drug dealers and between the customers. This is the way how the markets are structured. But what is changing when we move to the digital platforms, what is changing there in terms of tensions is the platform operator is with the platform operator, a new actor is actually entering the scene, entering the market, and so the dynamics of the tensions between the different actors change as well, because a new player is entering the field, if you want to call it like that. I'm interested to conduct further research on this, on the ways in which the platform operator exercises control and exercises power, in ways in which the platform operator helps to evade law enforcement activities and enables at the same time. So there are two challenges for the platform operator. The one is how to deal with law enforcement activity, and the other is how to deal with the anonymous environment, which is a benefit of the crypto market ecosystem, by using digital technologies in order to anonymize or pseudonymize the transactions and interactions between the other actors. And here, sorry, I think I lost my own track. And the question is, how does the platform operator navigate through those two different challenges? Maybe I have a question for Yuanyuan, if that is okay.
Yeah, go for it. I think we have maybe a minute left, so
yeah,
a quick one.
Yuanyuan, you mentioned inefficient markets. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit on that one? In which way are crypto markets inefficient?
So you mean like, so this is your question is not literally like for the presentation I gave today, it hasn't really shown much about that, but based on my past research, like when you analyze the long range memory in terms of in the cryptocurrency market, you can see the Hurst exponent. So these are quite specific for my area. So there is some ways to analyze whether the market is efficient or not. Yeah, but in general, based on my how to say, like past published papers, we found that the market efficiency is evolving, so it's changing all the time. So it's not always inefficient, and it's neither always efficient. And we can discuss a bit more later, probably after the conference. Yeah, happy to discuss a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Yuanyuan. Your presentation raised a lot of questions, so we can chat about that further offline, perhaps. We have to change panels now, so thank you again to David, Meropi, and Yuanyuan. Thank you for participating. If you're in the audience, and please feel free to follow up with the presenters if you have further questions, but we better leave it there. Thank you.